I didn't even know there's such a thing as a meetup. So started visiting meetups, mostly at Prezi because they were hosting lots of meetups. And so there was this meetup called Native Development Meetup, and once one of the guests was Chris Eathop.
All right.
So I met him there, and then I think he was the first person from the international community visiting a meetup there I was attending. So I just started to realize the power of these events. Like it's cool to invite someone from, not Budapest.
Yeah.
And then just things turned around, and I don't know. I somehow ended up being the organizer of the meetup, and then um, Chris Eathop invited me to speak at the Functional Swift conference in Brooklyn in 2015, and so that was my first conference, and things just went went even more crazy after that. Like people started um, asking me to speak at conferences, and I asked other people I met at conferences to speak in Budapest. So I had this pitch that I told everyone, like Budapest is the most romantic Central European city. It's so cool. You should visit. The iOS developers are so nice. So somehow people started saying yes, and I had several companies like Prezi, Bitrise, Ustream. They were all supporting me, my efforts financially. So I could organize these events, invite people from abroad, and they all got me covered. So
In 1 kilometer, use the right lane to turn right on Bathurst Street.
I was in a very lucky position, really. Lots of people, locally and internationally. So I was actually just playing this, person in the middle between communities. So I just had to connect people to each other. Now it's actually the meetup is running without me. So I think it's just a matter of someone putting lots of effort into it, and the fact that everyone is nice and everyone has good intentions and want to share knowledge. So I think it's just a good mix of nice people.
Turn right on
Yeah.
Bathurst Street.
That's really cool, and it's really cool to hear because I have also kind of similar experiences, but I haven't actually organized a conference yet. But
Continue
I
straight for 12 minutes to 18th Side Road.
in 2015, actually, the same year, to just go to my first conference. I was very nervous. I had no experience kind of going to conferences and speaking. And then all of a sudden, I kind of found myself just getting into this world and knowing more people and getting more involved with the community. And this is also where I started realizing that the thing I enjoy the most about being an iOS developer is being a part of the community, both in open source and speaking and going to conferences and meetups. And yeah, it's really been amazing to this world and getting to know all these people all around the world, and sharing all these ideas, and yeah, just having a good time.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Really cool. So what do you say? Should we start diving into our questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. So as you know, this show is all
Sounds
about
enthusiastic.
answering questions and talking about topics that are submitted by you, the listeners. And it's really the backbone of the show. So if you have something that you'd like us to talk about in a future episode, make sure to send it in. The easiest way is to go to swiftbysundell.com/podcast, where there's a form where you can submit a question or topic, or you can just tweet to @swiftbysundell on Twitter, and it'll get picked up, and we'll talk about your topic in a future episode. So we're going to warm up today with a little bit of a non-technical question, and those are also really welcome. It's really cool to sometimes talk about a bit about things that are maybe not super related to Swift specifically, but really involve, really affect us as Swift developers, talking about teamwork and these kind of things. So we have a question here from Gabor Nagi Farkas, who is our mutual friend from Budapest, and he's asking, is there a difference in the development culture in the US versus in Hungary? So kind of what you've experienced moving from Hungary to the US working with programming and software.
Great question. Um, so as I mentioned before, since this is the city of developers, my experience might be, very special, not U.S. versus Hungary in general. But so here, as far as I can tell, there is a bit more competition because there are tons of tech companies, tons of great places, and they're all looking for engineers. So this creates a very different atmosphere. So I think there is more competition for individuals, and that means bigger companies, for example, they have all the benefits and all these great things they can offer for people to work with them, and I think people are more spoiled here, if I can use this word. I felt like um, the only difference between the tech bubble in Eastern Europe or the tech bubble in here is that this is this is a very rich place, and you can see that. Um, in actual work, I don't see much difference. I had the luck to work with excellent engineers in the past. I'm working with excellent engineers at the moment. I can't really raise an example of any huge difference between the two development cultures, except all these external um, influences as the actual difference between the two countries economically or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, in more details, I'm not sure which part of the development culture is in question, but I also think there's a difference between working at a startup here and working at a startup at home. And this is also mostly a financial question. So I think if you have like a startup with lots of potential in Silicon Valley, you more likely to reach a point with your funding or any kind of financial support where you can actually just go out and develop and experiment. Whereas in Eastern Europe, it's a lot harder to even start out with something like that because it's very I think it's a lot more difficult to raise money there.
Yeah, because a lot of the investors are also in Silicon Valley, right? And that's kind of what they're looking at primarily. So
Exactly.
by being there, I guess you're just kind of physically closer to these people who are making those calls.
Yeah. So it means I have the opportunity to work at a place that already has all these resources, and being very special in a way that it's a hardware startup and we're three people doing iOS now. We work very closely to each other, so like in more day to day in that aspect, I think we are like a startup-y setup where we work closely to each other and designers, and we come up with things together. We mostly know what the others are working on, so it's for now it's a very small team, but I couldn't
architectural decisions or trade-offs you made in parts of the app. So when working on topology, either app, have you made any tough architectural decisions yet?
Oh, I never mentioned I joined the company half a year ago.
Right.
So I
So you've completely changed the architecture by now, right?
no, definitely not. So um, yeah, I've been working on big chunks of the code, but I haven't, come up with the architecture. But we are definitely free to, work with any kind of patterns or ideas that make sense. So what I'm doing at Topology is it isn't textbook MVC and it's not really MVVM either. What I'm trying to work out is something that's always
In 1 kilometer, use the right lane to turn right on 18th Side Road.
what I usually do is
Red light camera ahead.
we mostly work with MVC. We're trying to make it make it sensible in a way, that it's a clean architecture. Like we move logic out of the view, so the view controller is just a view. Um, I'm sometimes adding view models, but this is just for trying to come up with a good name for
Turn
something
right on 18th Side Road.
between data and its representation on the UI. So it's not really either. I don't have a name for it.
Right, like MVVM-ish, essentially.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Watch out, vehicle on shoulder ahead. In 1.9 kilometers, turn left on Dufferin Street.
Do very similar things. I also use MVC, but then I love to, like you say, extract sometimes some of the like data to view binding logic into a view model, but it might not be a view model as you would think about it if you were doing like textbook MVVM, right? Where the view model is much larger, more important object. It's more just like a middleman, right? Or a middle layer between the view and the model itself.
Convenient. When I'm coming up with new things, and sometimes I feel
In
like
1 kilometer, use the left lane to turn left.
it's an overkill to add the view model for this type, to represent this type on a more like somewhere between the view and the model. But then the next time, like month later, I need to um, you know display the same type, same kind of information, but on somewhere, on different parts of the UI. And I realized, like, oh well, I actually implemented a view model for it, so now I can just use it, and then it makes all sense. So I don't always come up with these for the first time, but I try to think about.
Turn left on Dufferin Street.
In fact, that we're a startup. We move fast. We change the design a lot. We iterate on that. Even the navigation, all the screens. We do a lot of experiments, so it can actually happen.
Continue straight for 30 minutes to Steeles Avenue West.
I'm gonna use that part of the app in different parts of the UI. So these are the things I keep in mind.
Yeah, and I guess that's a trade-off in of itself, right? That you know that you are moving fast, you are iterating a lot on the product, and you're setting things up to be easily changed and also quickly reused if you're abstract things out. Like one example is in one of the apps I'm working on right now, we have some like core data models that are used in many different view controllers. So before, all of these different view controllers, they kind of had their own, way of fetching this model. They were kind of network aware. They were loading things, from the back end and performing these models. And now instead, we kind of abstracted all that out into services where each view controller, they can just ask for a certain specific piece of data from a service, and then the service itself can do the networking, it can handle the caching, and the view controllers can be a lot more thin because they don't have to be aware of these details. They can just ask for the data when they need it.
I see. Interesting. We have, I think we have a slightly different setup. So since we have like one piece of backend infrastructure that we are communicating to, we don't have, for example, user management for now. We only have like processing on the server or just moving files from the app to like a storage and back. So for that, we have like a layer of operations, and there is like a layer of jobs that you're working within the app, and there is like another layer of the actual data representation for all the faces in the app.
Yeah.
So the actual view controllers are not that close to any kind of services because this is like all the job management. It's like a very different part of the infrastructure. So we don't pull data and represent it on UI. We have like a process that's from several steps, and at the end you get something, but it's not close to the actual representation of the UI. So I think it's a little bit different. Asking for like a list of data and then displaying it on the UI.
Yeah, because you have a lot more heavy data, I guess, and it needs to go through a bunch of pipelines before the UI can be presented, right?
Yeah. So
All right.
thanks, Gilad, for the question.
Yeah, great question. Really great question. So let's move over now to question number 3, and this one comes from also our friend Sash Satz, and he is at Satz on Twitter, and he's asking about the new cool trend called augmented reality. And you are doing a lot of augmented reality, so he's asking, how is writing and debugging an AR-heavy app different from a regular app? Is there any special infrastructure that you developed, and any workarounds for the simulator?
Very good question. And the answer might gonna be disappointing because yes, we are working on this AR heavy app and it's very cool, but I actually don't work on those parts. So we work with SceneKit and Metal. So it is very interesting, and it's great to have the opportunity to just peek into that part of the code from time to time and try to understand what's going on. But I'm not a graphics programmer, so I'm just like on a very basic level try to understand how these objects live in our app. So more like from the consumer part where I know there's like a bird of graphics code living in our app that I touch from the outside from time to time, and I have usually no idea what I'm doing, so I try to look up documentation and understand what kind of objects are these. Um, but I know for a fact that it's not possible with our app to debug it in the simulator.
Approaching a railroad crossing.
It was actually not possible to build and run our app in the simulator for a while. I think it was because of Metal.
Yeah, I've faced a similar kind of problems working with Metal. Like, yeah, I was implementing my game engine that I'm working with using Metal for a while, and yeah, it doesn't run on the simulator, so I had to use a fallback like Core Animation on the simulator, and then try to run on device instead.
How do you do that? So you just replace all the codes. I mean, you just use the core animation.
Yeah, so what I did was that I abstracted the rendering code into a protocol that I call the rendering context. And then I had an implementation of it for Metal, where like I had APIs that the engine could call into to render textures and move objects around. And then I could have another implementation of that same protocol, but using core animation. And I could have a third one for testing. So that architecture was actually really nice for many different reasons. Eventually, I actually just went with core animation instead. So now the engine I work on is just based on core animation. But I still think it's a nice kind of abstraction to use when you're working with these like hardware sensors and cameras and rendering APIs to kind of create this like a little bit of an abstraction for yourself, a very thin one that is kind of protocol oriented, so that you can mock things and you can have fallbacks in the simulator.
That's very interesting. Why was it so important to run in the simulator that you actually implemented the same thing in with another technology?
Mostly just for speed of development. Like, I work in so many different weird places where I can't really comfortably have a phone that is debugging and attached. And now you can do wireless debugging, which is better. But for example, I'm working a lot on planes and airports, and sitting in my couch working. And for that, I just wanted to be able to run the simulator in a nice way, so I didn't always have to connect to my device.
It is very convenient. So when once one of the persons on the team deliver this feature to be able to in the simulator, it's turned out to be pretty convenient to just work on UI stuff. Like you can run any kind of device there, so it's much easier to work on UI in the simulator.
Yeah, you get much quicker turnarounds. You don't have to, copy all the things over to the device. It just can, yeah, it's just more convenient and easy. Especially if you like you say, when you're working on something that is not directly related to the thing the hardware is needed for, like the UI or different things. But I guess with AR, mocking the camera is not really easy. You kind of need to have the real thing in order to actually be able to work on that.
Yeah, so it's since it's not real time, so once you had done the video of yourself and we processed it, we have this thing called the try-on view. So if you use the app and you made a selfie of yourself and you open it up and you can play with it, design your glasses, you can also buy it.
Nice
you,
plug.
um, so that is our kind of AR view. That is, that's a video with glasses rendered on that. So
Yeah.
we don't need the camera for that view, but we need Metal. So it's just empty on the simulator. I think it's fine. So if you don't directly work on that view, it's not a problem at all.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So we haven't developed any special infrastructure yet, but we are looking for a graphics programmer at the moment. So I think all of these, as we evolve as a company, these things are getting more mature with time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the first thing you're doing when you're a startup is not, okay, let's spend 3 years building infrastructure. It's more make it up as you go, right?
Yeah, but I'm very excited and looking forward to have someone on the team with experience in these things because I think it's a very interesting graphics programming. Not just yet, maybe, but I'm really happy to have the opportunity. So very very exciting stuff, really.
Yeah, sounds really cool. And we can put a link in the show notes to the job application or the job description if someone out there is interested in this stuff and wants to check it out.
Oh, definitely.
Cool. So that was a really great question. Now we have another one, which is a very commonly asked question, and it's about how to get started with iOS development. So this comes from someone who calls themselves You Did Appear on Twitter, which I think is a great handle. And this person asks, what is some great advice for someone who is getting started with iOS development about 8 or 9 months ago? What are your thoughts about that? So, as I said, this is a very common question, and I thought the way we could kind of talk about it is just by starting just very briefly mentioning kind of how we got started with iOS development. So, how did you get started, Agnes, with iOS development?
I think it's a very boring story. I studied iOS development at the university.
Oh, you did? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So um, it was. I think it was in 2012. I was studying at the computer engineering at the university in Hungary, and I was so lucky to get into the first ever class of iOS development in that school. So there were some guys who were actually working in the industry for years, and they were working with. I think they started with Mac development, and then they immediately opted in for iOS, obviously, when the opportunity came up. And then they were so nice, like they went back to the university and they were teaching kids like me to iOS. And so right after I finished school, I haven't even finished it yet. I just applied for an internship at a company, and they immediately hired me. Like there was no iOS developers in the country before.
Wow.
I think we were probably part of the first, I don't know, 50 people doing it. So those guys, I'm still in contact with one of those guys who were, teaching me iOS development, and he's doing it ever since. He's running a startup called Shapers 3D, working on this amazing CAD app for the iPad Pro. So it's still very inspiring to see like all the people who started the same class or um, have been there as a teacher are still in the same profession, just pushing it further and further. So
Yeah, that's really amazing. And they still teach these classes as well.
I think there are other people teaching that class.
Oh, okay, right. So it's been passed on to the next group
the
of
next
people.
generation.
The next generation. Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, it is. How about you?
So I got started kind of just tinkering with iOS in my spare time. I was not even working as a full-time developer back then, so I wanted to like get into it. So this was like in the really early days of the iOS SDK. I was sitting, at home, trying to learn Xcode, trying to learn Objective C, and I wanted, of course, to make games. This has kind of been the thing that has driven so much of kind of my progression as a developer is games. I always want to make games for everything. New Apple TV comes out, let's make games for that. So there's always games. So I was just kind of learning on my own. I was reading, material online. I was tinkering around with it, trying to make sense of it, learning from tutorials, and just by reading what people were posting online and things like that. So I guess if we should segue a little bit into what kind of advice we have for beginners, I think for me it would be to be very curious and also to have something like that that you actually I wanted to make games. So I was learning because of that, and because of that, I was always motivated to, go in and read things online and check blogs and videos and try to just like learn on my own. And now also, I mean, that was like in the super early days of iOS development. Now there are so many great resources available. I mean, you have great conferences, you have videos from those conferences, great blogs, you have podcasts about Swift development. So there are so many things that you can learn from. So I think my just biggest advice would just be to be really curious and just explore things and try them out and see what you like. What do you think, Agnes?
Um, yeah, and I also have a comment to your last statement. So yes, there are so many resources out there. I also think it's in one way easier to learn new things about iOS development today than it was when I started, for example, or when actually, when people started the day it was possible to third-party app development for iOS, they didn't have any resources,
Yeah.
literally. So I think in one way it's easier today, but in one way it's much more difficult because the internet is full of resources and it is actually changing a lot more frequently than it used to. So I think it could be very difficult to distinguish, between what is crucial knowledge, what is big companies fulfilling their needs with great solutions for large scale software, or what is very smart people playing around with Swift, producing amazing things that mortals don't even necessarily understand. So I think there are a lot of resources out there. Maybe the first step is to try to understand what is for you. Like, for example, for me today, I have a lot of, I read and listen to and watch a lot of good resources on Swift because I've only been working with Swift in the past half year, so I still have a lot to catch up with. Um, but when I'm reading about amazing, huge frameworks from developed by huge corporate companies, I feel like yeah, that's amazing, but that's something not for me. So I don't necessarily go there and read about that because I know I have limited time and brain capacity. So I think it's important to try to um, distinguish between what resources are actually helping you and what resources are things that you might not need right now, and maybe it's like a lot of distraction from your goals of learning this.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's definitely like, this challenge of trying to make something out of all the noise, right? And I don't want to, noise, but yeah, you see what I mean. It's there's a lot to kind of go through. So I think trying to find some concrete topics that you want to learn about. Like for example, if you want to learn, how to really master a UI collection view, or how to render something using core animation or the UI view animation API, to dig into that and just see what's available, and then look at a couple of different sources and solutions, and not just take the first one and say, okay, this is the only solution, or like you say, look at some maybe an open source project from a huge company and say, oh, this is clearly the way to go. But rather look at a couple of different ones, maybe fire up a playground and try some of them out and see kind of what fits your style and what you think solves the problem you're facing.
Yeah, and I think another good advice is to, if you're just starting out, work with other people.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the thing that got me here. Like, I've been working with amazing people all along, so I think I definitely learned most of my knowledge from other people. I think that's the easiest way to consume valuable knowledge. So there you have a person with experience who already decided what resources are important to know, and they just hand it over to you in the most consumable way. So um, I think I think this is the most important. I also know people who started out as freelancers and they're amazing. So you could be one of those people. I'm one of the people who would have needed years to, try something as being a freelancer because I don't know. I felt like working with other people, inspires me the most.
Great. So I think that's all the questions that we have time for this episode. I want to thank everybody who sent in questions. They were really great, and we'll make sure to save some of the questions for an upcoming episode. And I know you told me, Agnes, that some of the questions that were specific for you, you want to kind of reach out and answer them later as well.
Yes, yes, definitely. I'm gonna do that on Twitter.
That's perfect. So, if you want to ask a question for an upcoming episode, you can do so by going to swiftbysundell.com/podcast or just tweet to @swiftbysundell on Twitter. You can also follow @swiftbysundell on Twitter to get the latest updates about the show, the blog, and also some new exciting projects that will be coming soon. On the next episode, my guest will be G. Rambo, and this guy, he doesn't only have the coolest name in the entire iOS community, he's also a really great developer. You might have seen him lately in some Apple-related news because he was one of the guys that actually extracted a lot of the information from this leaked HomePod firmware and the iOS 11 GM. So he was one of the people who kind of posted a lot of the information before the Apple event. So we're going to talk a lot about reverse engineering, which I think is going to be really exciting. He also made a WWDC app for macOS, so we'll talk about that for sure as well. So make sure to send some questions if you have something that you would like me and G to talk about. So we've reached the end of this episode, so all that remains is for me to thank you very much, Agnes, for joining me on this show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. So if people want to reach out to you online, where should they go?
Twitter, definitely. So my handle is very Hungarian. It's Vásárhelyi. So
I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
yes, thank you.
Yeah,
That
no
was
worries.
that was an early decision in my career to go for that handle.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, otherwise I probably would have tried to take something shorter. But yeah,
Oh yeah.
great. So
Drive to the Asian supermarket. Use the left lane to turn left.
follow Agnes on Twitter, and thank you everybody for listening. And I'll talk to you on the next episode.